Hello.
Michael Harris, Friends of Animals. Is this who I am speaking with?
It sure is. How are you, EW?
I'm fine. Ladies and gentlemen, the Director of Wildlife Law Program for Friends of Animals, Attorney Michael Harris, a good friend of ours here on Troubadours and Raconteurs. And I have a bit of a cold. I apologize to you and everyone listening, but we'll get through it. Hopefully I don't sound too nasally. But nonetheless, how's everything going, sir?
Things are great. Having a very productive start of our year, although since the last time we talked, we live in a completely mixed up, upside down world. But
oh my God. Yeah, that's an understatement.
We still have to try to survive and continue on, right?
Yeah, maybe we'll get into that. I know you're talking about who won the Golden Globes. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've never seen such amazing acceptance speeches before.
Yes, Meryl. But let's. I know you're excited about something that's going on with your organization, Friends of Animals. You have a new associate, I guess, someone who's helping you with some things. Martha Nussbaum, right?
Well, I wouldn't call her an associate. She's an amazing woman. If your viewers don't know who she is, she's a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago, and she's a renowned, and I mean, probably with respect to folks in our world, she's probably going to go down in history as a Socrates type. But she's a renowned philosopher and feminist. She's been around for about 30 years now, and just has got amazing things to tell us about our world. Interestingly, she was here in Denver this past Monday with those of us at the Friends of Animals. We did a presentation about animal rights, something that Martha is a strong supporter of. But she also did a speech earlier in the day that I was able to attend about the political election and the psychology of fear and the politics of fear. So she has a lot to say about a lot of things that are going on in our world, and she's got quite a broad breadth of knowledge.
Yeah. She's, as you said, she's a rock star basically in academia. She's in particular with the humanities. I know a bit about her myself from over the years. When you first mentioned Martha, I didn't know who you were talking about, and but then you informed me it was Nussbaum, and wow, I mean, the Fragility of Goodness is one of, I think, her most important and well-known books, but she's written several. And as you mentioned, Socrates, that level of a philosopher she indeed is. She's the person that goes around and criticizes Noam Chomsky, and he makes note.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I have to say, you and I have both probably seen a lot of amazing speakers. I mean, I think of someone like, we just saw Michelle Obama last year speak, and just how, emotional and amazing that was. And I've say about the President Obama as well, and a lot of people that I've seen. But you know what? Watching Martha on Monday, and I don't want to gush too much here, but watching her on Monday, I was just like, I've never seen anything like this, because it's not necessarily her presentation style. It's not certainly not as smooth as Michelle Obama's was at the convention last year. But she's able to take, like, by memory, passages that were written 2,000 years ago and make them related to something that was in the New York Times this morning. And or when she gets asked questions by people who are, should be her intellectual peers, just to watch her just sort of like slice through the answers, and everyone just sort of goes, yeah, why didn't we think of that, right? So, boy, it was amazing to watch. It was probably the closest thing to watching a human computer mind work on the spot. It was really amazing, and I think everyone there. Well, first of all, to have her here in Denver and to have her affiliated with Friends of Animals, we're just really honored by that. But then to have the opportunity to sit there in person and hear her thoughts about what's going on in the world today, it's an amazing opportunity.
Well, let me be clear. What kind of affiliation does she have right now with Friends of Animals? And what did
Yeah.
share a bit of what she spoke about?
Yeah, it's a really important step forward for not only our organization but for animal rights. And so we actually first got connected with Martha through her daughter. Her daughter is a lawyer and an animal rights activist, and we began working with her a couple of years ago. And her mother became very impressed with what was going on and sort of revealed her interest in participating as well about a year and a half ago. But it's been a slow process to see exactly how it would all work out. But I guess this is what I would say if I could take a moment. And when your listeners hear about animal rights, there's not really a single definition of that for sure. But in general, there are sort of two sort of paths that animal advocates, animal lawyers are taking. And one is something that most people are totally familiar with. If you've heard of the Humane Society, then you know about trying to stop animal abuse, torture, just, the types of things that we want to make illegal, and to prevent pain and agony, and whether it's domesticated pets or farm animals or even wildlife. The yahoos who just think that they could abuse these animals. And there's been a long history of trying to improve the standard of treatment for animals, and there's a body of law for that, and a lot of people work in that area. The other is more tied to rights itself. That is, it sort of starts with this premise that animals have autonomy, and that they should be given legal protections and privileges, often normally associated with humans, in order to protect that autonomy. And over the years, we've seen different efforts trying to get personhood for maybe chimpanzees or for whales so that they could have sort of constitutional protections in this country. I've seen efforts like to try to establish guardian ad litems for animals so that they could go to court and try to get compensation for, think of it this way. If you got a whale in captivity at SeaWorld, and SeaWorld's making a bunch of money off of it, arguments have been made maybe that money should go to benefit the whale and its species, right? Mm-hmm. It's the one that's being, commercialized. And so that's sort of the route that Friends of Animals is working on, this animal rights front. But this notion of autonomy has always been a problem. And it was first advanced by a really well-known scholar. His name is Stephen Weiss. He should be given tons of credit for leading the way with respect to animal rights over the last 20, 30 years. But this notion of autonomy has always caused real problems because what does that mean? Philosophers would tell you that autonomy means a lot of different things, and Martha would go into that in more detail if she was here. But the reality is that when it's written down in briefs or when it's being argued in a case in a courtroom, it often sounds a lot like intelligence.
Right.
And so, a chimpanzee, high level of intelligence, a whale, a dolphin. But from a standpoint of someone who has a broader perspective on animal rights, that's not a very good way to characterize autonomy, because it leaves out, potentially 90% of all animals, because we don't know their intelligence level, or they don't express it in a way that that makes us sort of inherently understand it by its facial recognitions, the way it acts, the way it could sort of communicate with us. Very few animals have reached that level with their relationships with humans. So, and it's also caused a real problem for Steve and others in the courtroom, because even when judges are convinced that a particular animal like a chimpanzee is highly intelligent and displays some level of autonomy, the judges have said, well, is that really enough? Is that what a person is all about? And the courts that have opined on it have sort of thought, don't persons really also need to be able to exercise rights and obligations of citizenship? And and since an animal can't do that, then even if they're autonomous, they shouldn't be really given rights like persons. So this is where Martha's really important. And so you mentioned the fragility of goodness and her early work on that and tying in Greek tragedies and philosophies. But her more recent work, and really what has been the core of her existence for the last 20 years, is capabilities theory. And capabilities theory was first sort of focused on those of us in the human population that have been given less treatment historically by the law for various reasons. Mental disabilities, whether that's because you were born that way or you developed Alzheimer's disease or something else debilitating as you aged, people that have gone through severe emotional trauma, children that have been abused and left on their own, and a number of other categories of human beings that have been less than able to defend their own rights. And it wasn't very long ago. It was, even when I was born in the 1960s and clearly in the 1950s, our legal system for dealing with these people was to institutionalize them, to put them somewhere where their physical needs would be taken care of. But we didn't really, in the law at least, really didn't look at them as really human beings. The law didn't really care about nurturing some of their, what Martha would call central capabilities. That is their body integrity, their ability to play, their sense of imagination at whatever level they may have, their ability to have some emotion, affiliation with someone around them. Quite honestly, I think it's more simply put, an ability to have some type of meaningful life. And so Martha's work has been instrumental, and others who have adopted the capabilities approach in helping to lay the basis for expanding legal rights for these types of people. And it naturally lays the foundation for providing additional rights for animals as well. And Martha has embraced this in more recent times, and she actually wrote a book, or co-authored a book on animal rights, applying the capabilities theory. And her daughter has been really instrumental. Her daughter thought from an early age that her mother's work could play out in the animal world.
So through capabilities, capabilities theory, it opens up or adds to, redefines the idea of autonomy and the legal argument of whether or not someone should have that.
I would say what it does is it lays the foundation for why we should provide, whether it's an animal or a human that is not necessarily functioning at the type of emotional level that that most of us are, for treating them with the same respect and dignity, giving them the same legal protections. For instance, you and I expect to decide where we want to live and who we want to live with and how we want to make ourselves happy. Some people in this world are not necessarily able to make those decisions, but that doesn't mean that we should just institutionalize them. Our legal system should design a way through guardian ad litems and other mechanisms to try to ascertain what would best provide a living situation for that person so that they can live up to their full capability, even if those capabilities are diminished.
And I imagine, there are inherent problems with that, given in many cases the kind of sentient beings we're talking about do indeed have a difficulty expressing or communicating to others clearly. So we wouldn't necessarily know what they really want or prefer.
And you could say that with someone with Alzheimer's or
right.
a severe mental disability as well. The nice thing about with animals is that the science is on this revolutionary forefront as well. in that, and you and I have probably talked about this before, that, if you go back to the same time period we're talking about where someone with a disability was just treated as let's just make sure they're institutionalized and we physically are able to feed them and bathe them so that they don't become too disgusting or die or something, right?
Right, the basic sort of approach, yeah.
Right. But, we also took that approach with animals, like trying to figure out what they need, How much space do they need? How many mates do they need? How much food do they need? But today, the science, what is called compassionate conservationism and compassionate biology, starts to say, you know what? Animals, like humans, no matter what their intelligence level is or what their level of ability to express it to us, have really rich emotional and social lives. And so we have Martha's theory, right, about, we should focus our law on protecting the capabilities of animals, human and non-human alike. And we have the science saying they have capabilities. It's not just all speculative. We can show that animals can live meaningful lives. So now we are in a better position than we were just when we were just arguing autonomy intelligence, to sort of say to judges and to lawmakers, we've got to protect these. We have a moral obligation under the capabilities theory, and we have the scientific knowledge to know that it will matter if we protect it. We will be able to see that the animals are not, their capability of living a meaningful life isn't being diminished because of us.
And how do we define that, though, Michael? How do we define that standard where we're not diminishing their capabilities?
Well, it's tough, I think that as a good person and an animal rights activist, I think I should start with the assumption that all animals are able to live a capable life, and my interference with that should be avoided at all costs. Now, saying that I'm a good person and I believe that is different than saying the law should provide it. And I think that's is a slow track. I think what we have to do is, continue to rely on the development of science. So I believe, for instance, and you know this from our past conversations, that there's enough information right now to make a legal case that we have diminished the meaningful lives of animals like whales in captivities, elephants in captivities, chimpanzees in captivities, some large mammals. Just because we could note their behavior, we could even, using neurology, measure changes in their brain functions based upon the stress we induce to them. Whether we separate them from their mates or whether we keep them in a confined area, we could start to measure this. Now it's up to the science to start showing, start getting down to, how do the storks feel being, taken from the wild and stuck, in captivity? How do blackbirds feel when we tear down all the trees to build houses? I think these are things that we have to try to be aware that there is likely an impact, and push and praise science to move forward to be able to demonstrate it, so we can demonstrate it to judges and lawmakers.
And then I guess the end result that you would desire would be not having in captivity or the whales or elephants or storks, so that they can live to their potential, to their capabilities. And have not have them oppressed by human animals so much.
That's right. And it's really, we don't really know ultimately in 50 or 60 or 70 years what we may know. It very well could be that you can create an environment where humans could interact with certain animals and make it less stressful on them, less infringing on their capabilities of living a meaningful life. That is, maybe the zoos of today are detrimental to them, but maybe some animals could do well in an alternative type of zoo that we don't even know what that looks like today. But I think what's important is that we need to, just as a people, be accepting of the fact that this may be true for animals, that we may be making them very miserable and diminishing their natural innate capabilities of living a meaningful life, and be willing to accept that where science can demonstrate it to some reasonable certainty, that we should make it illegal and try to use our laws to lessen our impacts on these animals.
And where would we draw the line? I mean, obviously, I think most people, well, actually, I can't say most people, but I know I would agree clearly that you should not be going out for big game to mount a head on your wall. That is unnecessary. Zoos, I have also issues with because of the confinement and how animals are taken out of their habitat and such. But you mentioned blackbirds in a forest. If a forest needs to be taken down for, let's just assume a genuinely good project that would benefit human beings, do we forego that project that would help our species to save another species from stress or pain?
Well, first, just one quick thing. I don't know. I mean, there's just so much we don't know about it. I think what's really exciting right now is that scientists are embracing the idea that the animals do have capabilities, and they're really excited about studying it in all different levels. And it may turn out down the road, right, that a mouse. Have you ever seen the movie A Mousetrap? You know how it's living that really comfortable life, Yeah. It had all kinds of capabilities. But I'm just saying, it may turn out that mice have like really, really dynamic lives, and they're capable of really experiencing a wide range of emotions and feelings. And it could turn out like an animal like a rhino is just a lump, We just don't know, right?
Right.
So we should be careful to judge it on any one character, right? I mean, it's easy to envision a rhino just standing around with, an IQ of 2 or something like that, not knowing what's going on and being happy anywhere, right? But we just don't know. That's the point. But to answer your question, I'm not saying we should make this stuff illegal. What I'm saying is that, and we call it a right to ethical consideration, that because these animals are likely to be able to live meaningful lives in whatever that means to them and to their species. So it's a very species by species approach, which helps with the science, because then they could study it on that basis. But we shouldn't take action and not consider that. That we should have an ethical duty to consider it. So if we're going to clear a forest, we should have to disclose that to the public, and we should have to take it into consideration. And that itself could fundamentally alter our world in the future, right? When we first had to start realizing that people that we used to say were in a vegetative state still experienced emotions, they still made people around them happy, they still were able to form bonds with certain people. Once we realized that when we just shove them in an institution, how awful that was, and we gave those people a right of ethical consideration, our view of them evolved, the laws protecting them evolved, and now we try to do what we can to give them tools that make them capable of living a more meaningful life, no matter what state they're in. And we don't call it a vegetative state anymore either. That changed as well because of a right of ethical consideration, really propelled by Martha's capability approach and other philosophical thinking in that area, and moral thinking in that area. And so that's what I'm saying. It sounds radical to say today if we know that there are, let's say, owls in the forest that we need to build a housing tract, and we know that those owls are intelligent, they have social lives, they clearly have emotional feelings or whatever, that it should be illegal. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we should give them equal consideration as we would members of our own species when we are impacting them. And if in 25 years from now people don't want to tear down forests that have owls in it. Well, that's a natural evolution of law and society.
I like it. I like it. I mean, that is an obvious comparison, maybe an unfair sort of vice versa duality, but it's something that people would go to immediately. Like, well, you want us to harm ourselves, our own species, for another quote unquote lesser species? I mean, and then you get into all of that. Well, we are the dominant animal on the planet. For those who even are comfortable calling us animals, some don't even consider us animals.
Yeah, they think we're way above that.
Yes. Right, exactly. Now, you mentioned Stephen Weiss. I had him at law school, where you and I had the good fortune to cross paths back in the 90s.
And he visited us a few months ago here in Denver and watched his new film, Unlocking the Cage. I have great respect for him. But I think as a lawyer and you're in a social cause, you have to be willing to explore as many creative paths as possible. I think the autonomy path that Steve has championed over the years is starting to run its course.
Right. And now Martha's path is one to take.
I believe personally, and I think you actually might see in the very near future an article by Steve that starts to take it as well.
Yeah, we're trying to get him on the program, actually. We reached out to him a couple of times. We'd like to talk to him as well. So I think I'm going to have to mention that I was a student of his. I didn't do that yet.
I didn't mention it to him either. I figured it'd just make us both feel old.
Yeah, him really old, probably. But when you remember when he was presenting how he tried to convince and understand himself our ethical responsibilities and the way we think as a species, as a people. He was taking us through the earliest philosophers, right up, through present day Peter Singer and what have you, and up to where we are now. And you have to take that into consideration because it informs how we do look at ourselves and all other creatures on this planet. For example, if you're a Christian or a Catholic, St. Thomas Aquinas has influenced you greatly in the way that you look at other animals, the way you look at the natural environment.
You do. You really do. I mean, and the thing about it is, I think this is where Steve runs into a little bit of a problem, is that, when it all boils down to all of the philosophical thoughts about animals for the last few hundred years, the two dominant approaches have been pain, suffering, pleasure, right? So these are sort of what you should be looking at. I mean, is it enough that an animal can suffer pain, or do they also have to enjoy pleasure? And does that pleasure have to be not just in the body, but in the mind, right?
Right.
And then the other approach has been intelligence, which is a more recent approach. And unfortunately, I think Steve's autonomy approach has been too connected to intelligence because at the end of the day, he doesn't really know how to define it.
Right.
And when he picks animals like chimpanzees, they're going, well, you're just focusing on intelligence. So
there's a flaw there that he can't get past now when trying to craft his arguments.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think Martha's work really gets him in. We can still talk about autonomy. I think that's important. I mean, in fact, one of Martha's central capabilities is bodily integrity, right?
Right.
So it is but she has 12, Now that doesn't mean every individual, whether that you're talking about humans or an animal, a non-human animal, has to be able to live a capable life of all 12 of them in that sense. But and I don't know if she would say you'd have to live more than one either. But when you look at the list, which is I'll just read it: life, bodily health, bodily integrity, play, sense, imagination, thought, emotion, practical reason, affiliation, and control over one's environment. Most animals display multiple ones. I mean, they do have bodily integrity, they have life. Many of them have some sense of imagination and thought and play and so forth.
And these are the capabilities we're talking about.
Yeah, these are what Martha calls your 12 central capabilities.
I have at least one or two of them, I'm pretty sure.
I do too, although,
It depends on the day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I will say this: I like to point out that all of this that we're talking about, Martha's work and this right of ethical consideration, it actually has historical roots in a show that we all adore called Star Trek, because it's the primary mission not to interfere with life.
You're right.
And so we've actually taken a huge step back in that sense on our own planet. But if you remember, that was always this underlying moral dilemma, particularly when the species was by its very nature harmful to the crew of the Enterprise.
I remember. That's great. You know, artists oftentimes are ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Now, Michael Harris, that's about all the time we have for this go-round on Troubadours and Raconteurs. Again, this is Michael Harris, a good friend of mine, and more importantly, for you guys, a very, very intelligent, capable, to say the least, attorney for the Friends of Animals organization. He's the director of wildlife law. And I think as years go on, Michael, we'll be talking about you in a similar context as we've been talking about some of these other folks today. I really am very impressed and very proud of all you're doing.
Well, thank you, EW. I appreciate that. And I'm very happy to be riding the coattails of Martha Nussbaum a little bit. Just a little bit. Tiny bit.
Yeah, you should. So until next time, good luck with everything. And I also, want to talk to you in the future about what you think regarding the present administration and Congress in D.C. and how that affects some of what you're doing.
I think I'll go get a drink. So
that might be a good idea.
Okay.
All right,
Thanks.
sir.
Bye.
Bye.